Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to talk about some comics that I've read recently. These are comics that I would describe as all ages comics. Basically they're targeted towards a younger reader, somewhere in between children's and YA, and for a different books fit within different categories. But I think books that are targeted towards a younger audience and is done well should be able to be enjoyed by all ages. The first comic I want to talk about is a graphic novel, and it is called The Prince and the Dressmaker by Wang. So this is a really fun story about a dressmaker who gets hired. She's working for a company. She gets responsibility for a really wealthy customer, and the customer herself wants something entirely different from her mother, who has sort of brought her to the dressmaker's office. And so the dressmaker makes something very fabulous and kind of scandalous for the era that this comic is sort of taking place. It has a historical vibe to it, but it doesn't, it's never described when the comic is set. She wears it at a ball, and then through that the dressmaker gets hired by a royal, and it is the prince of this town. He dresses up in women's clothes, and he hires the dressmaker to make fabulous dresses for him, and they go together to different balls and events. And this comic itself is about finding your identity, finding your place of belonging, both the dressmaker and the prince. The comic is sort of a coming of age for both of these characters. It's a really fun comic. It's really beautifully drawn. Parts of the comic is silent. There's no words in a few pages, and she tells the story really well through the art. And that is something I really like with comics, when the art is the prominent storyteller, the prominent medium for storytelling. And I think I see that strongly through the comics that are drawn and written by the same person. A lot of the time, because there were no words, it was even more effective. It's a lovely story, coming of age story, that a lot of people I think could relate to, being brave and being yourself even when it feels like you have the entire world against you. I loved this graphic novel, and I would highly recommend it. The next comic I want to talk about is Spinning by Tillie Walden. So this is a graphic memoir about Tillie Walden's experiences as a figure skater. So the book itself is partly about the figure skating and some of the experiences, some of the not so glamorous experiences of training as a figure skater and competing, sort of the social environment within the groups of figure skaters, but it's also Tillie Walden's coming of age story, coming to terms with the fact that she was gay, dealing with her first relationships. In the beginning of the book, she moves away to Texas, and she has to sort of start over with everything, start over and find new friends and find new community to belong to. And throughout this book there's a talk about bullying, talk about complicated familial relationships, and a lot of other things that are sort of mixed into the narrative. Sort of, she tells a lot of the story through her figure skating, but it is sort of a mirror of what it was happening outside of the figure skating. And I thought that this was beautiful. Again, this is a comic that is very effective in the use of art. It has a very limited color palette, so most of the comic is in this sort of lilac shade, but then there are yellow parts throughout the comic, sort of as a highlight. And one of the things I liked best about this book, the art style, is that she uses light in really interesting ways. She sort of highlights both the loneliness through dark portions of the book, and bright lights when, for example, she's competing and having the spotlight in her face. It contrasts really well with her feeling of loneliness and of disconnect from other people. This is a graphic memoir that actually made me cry, and I don't think a lot of comics has this emotional impact on me, but I thought that this was absolutely wonderful. And if you're looking for a graphic memoir, especially for younger readers who are going through some tough times, like finding out their sexuality, dealing with their own identity, and finding the courage to be themselves. Again, sort of the same vibes with The Prince and the Dressmaker, but in a non-fiction form. This is absolutely one that you should check out. So this is Spinning by Tillie Walden. Lastly, I want to talk about a picture book that I read recently, and that is The Liszts by Maclear and Julia Sarda. As I said before, I noticed that I actually really like when both words and art is by the same person, and one of the reasons I realized that was because I read this book and it showed me what can sometimes happen when it isn't the case. So in this book, it is basically a picture book about a family whose last name is the Liszts. It is a family who loves making lists, and each member have their own interests. The older sister likes making lists of her favorite cheeses and of her favorite records, like top 10 lists. There is a stranger that comes to the house, and he basically just barges in and tries to get the attention of the family, and some things happen along the way. The art by Julia Sarda is wonderful. She has definitely been inspired by the Addams Family. Both the story and the design of the characters seem very Addams Family-esque to me. I love the art. I love the color palette, which is really autumnal. The composition of the art and the way everything is put together with really an eye for detail, and I think the kind of art that both young readers and adult readers would really love to just stare at for ages and ages. So I love the art. However, I didn't love the story as much. A picture book doesn't necessarily have to have a really deep storyline. It is a very short book, but I think this just didn't really have much of a point. The story, as I said, is mostly told through lists in the first like half of the book, and then the stranger comes and tries to get the attention of the people in the house, and he eventually sort of joins their clan, and there's not much else going on, and there's not much emotional display in these characters. I felt like the story could have explored themes of belonging or of what a family is. That could have been the point of the book, but I felt like the story didn't really go there. So the story is slightly lackluster, and the writing itself, like the wording, isn't melodic in the way that I think I have started to expect from picture books now, that there is sort of a melody to them so that it's fun to read out loud. There is no real rhythm to these words. So as far as the writing goes, I felt myself not really caring about the words, to be honest, but the art is so beautiful that it's worth checking out this book just for that sake. I also quickly wanted to mention a Swedish picture book that has just come out. I read as an ebook, and I wanted to mention it at the end because it's not translated into English yet. In case you can read Swedish, I would highly recommend it. It's called Grävlings Resa by Cecilia Heikkilä. It is a beautiful story about basically a Moomin Papa character who has been an adventurer as a young man, and he has settled he's settled on an island. His life is really mundane, And then one day there's a storm and he ends up going off to sea and having adventures. It's a wonderful story and really beautifully drawn. So I would highly recommend it. If you can read Swedish, I would highly recommend picking this book up. I hope it gets translated so that I can rave about it even more. So those were all of the comics that I wanted to talk about today. If you read any of these comics, I would love to hear your thoughts about them. I hope you found something that sounded interesting to you. I hope you're having a really good day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.